Welcome, everybody, to the Strength and Knowledge podcast. I am very happy to bring to you Dr. Brendan Thompson, who is the owner of BT Acceleration. He has kind of a dual role, and we'll get into that in today's episode, both as a speed and performance coach, as well as a recent BPT grad. But welcome, Brendan.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. You were a small business owner while going through physical therapy school. This is followed, you followed up an all-American track career at the University of Iowa and decided to jump right into PT school. You were doing your speed and performance work right in 2017 while going through PT school at WashU. Tell us a little bit about really the transition from athlete to wanting to work with athletes.
Yeah, so when I was at Iowa, I actually got a lot of opportunities to work some camps and clinics there where they would bring in different high schoolers, middle schoolers from, all over the region. And I got the opportunity to work with these kids. Sometimes it was groups of 30, 40, 50. Sometimes it was groups of 10. And so just getting exposed to that a little bit throughout my tenure at Iowa, I think that got me really interested in just the big difference you can make by just changing little things here and there with these athletes and just seeing like that light bulb moment where you just show them something that works and, they're like, oh, wow, I'm figuring it out. And they have this big breakthrough. So, I always wanted to work with athletes, even when I was at Iowa, but unfortunately the NCAA doesn't appreciate athletes with jobs. And so, they think that you're going to get some private donor who's going to drop like $1 million on you for like a 10-minute session. So I'm going to get it. I'm sure that something's happened along the way somewhere where they're like, okay, this is fishy, but come on, track and field, not going to make any money. So as soon as I graduated, I finished All-American season in June of 17, and it was like maybe a week later, I started getting calls from some different coaches and parents to help work with their kids. And this is before I was even accepted into PT school. So like I was on some waiting lists at Iowa, UAB in Birmingham, and then WashU. And it was all the way until 2 weeks before I even got in. And that was when, I had officially opened my business like August 1st of 2017, like got my LLC and all that. And then boom, got the call, you got to move to St. Louis. You're going to WashU. I'm like, oh, well, that's a change of pace. So I get here and I just wanted to continue where I'd left off and just, maybe make some money here and there enough to pay the bills or even just get groceries or something. And it just ended up getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Basically, as every month went by, it started with just a couple cold calls or cold messages where I'm like, hey guys, speed trainer in the area. This is my resume. If you want to get faster, let me know, like $20 or something. And I happen to get a couple people. They share a couple posts. A couple people turns into 10 turns into 20. Then I'm getting coaches. And it was like I was running like an enterprise out of a cheap apartment. And it was like, whoa, like I've got coaches reaching out from all over the region now. I've got athletes coming from 2 or 3 hours away. This is just weird. This is just crazy. But at the same time, I was going through school too. And, it just kept me, I was just excited all the time because, I was so used to being under all that stress as an athlete where like, you never have free time. And so I got into PT school and I had tons of free time. Like I would study and I'd be like, okay, now study. Okay, now what? Study, now what? And then as I started to grow the training business, I was like, oh, well, I've got to drive 30 minutes there. I've got to drive 45 minutes there. And so I was just wheeling and dealing and my brains are working a million miles an hour. And I loved it. I was never stressed about being stressed. It's kind of backwards, but it's just the lifestyle you embrace as a student athlete. And I love it.
I get that. I don't know how much we've talked about this. I played lacrosse at Ohio State, and I remember going into the DPT program and being told not to work, like don't do anything else, just do school. I'm not sure if you had similar sentiments communicated to you, but I remember like just being able to feel like I could handle more. I jumped in and I coached lacrosse, but this is not about me; it's about you. I want to hear from your standpoint. And I have an idea of where I want to take this, but where do you think this rush to speed development has come from, say over the past 3 to 4 years? And are you working with mostly track athletes, or are these your multi-sport athletes?
So, having been obviously a high-level sprinter, I didn't show up at Iowa as the high-level sprinter that I left. So I was an average or slightly, I guess I was an above average high school sprinter, and I didn't have the biomechanics that I apparently needed. I grew up in the weight room, and I could move a ton of weight. I was 165 pounds. I could hang clean 300. I could squat 450. Could deadlift 5+, and I was still getting destroyed by my teammates. And I was like, man, what? These guys don't lift near as much as me. Like I've got the power advantage. Why am I not as fast? And it wasn't until I learned how to put my force into the ground in a meaningful way that suddenly I go from like barely traveling on the Iowa team to now I'm going to every meet all over the country. Now I'm on the big relays. Now I'm getting Big Ten medals, school records, and All-American status at the very end. So it was when I started to fall in love with kind of kinesiology, biomechanics, physics, and then getting into PT school where all we learned about is movement. And I'm like, man, we could really have a big impact here. Like, I've got the background, I've got the science. I can, if a parent asks me a question, I feel like I could answer it pretty good. Let's just do it. Let's do it, see what happens. So to answer your question about who I work with, my goal was track athletes at first. And then I realized no one wants to pay for track practice. So my model shifted very quickly to the football market, football, baseball, because they've got camps and combines, showcases. And with that came some multi-sport athletes who do like soccer or lacrosse. I've got quite a few lacrosse kids. And then I've got a handful that do track, but for the most part, if you're in a sport around here, it's basically year round. Everything they do is, okay, we're a football team. In the fall, we do football. In the spring, we're lifting for football. In the summer, we're doing 7-on-7. So it's just year round. And I try to tell them, like, come on, guys, do track. You'd be so good. But they're so laser focused here. So I just go with it, and I try to bridge the gap. Since they don't run track, I train them like track athletes. I give them the mechanics. I give them the cues, and gone a long way. It's helped a lot of kids so far, and I hope I can just continue to make that difference as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think over the past couple of years, we've seen this mentioned numerous times, right? Throughout the NFL season, playoffs, Super Bowl. Hey, these are how many multi-sport athletes are playing. These are how many of these players also did track. So it doesn't surprise me that your market is football. I have 2 brothers that are in college. One's actually going through NFL combine prep right now. Well, they don't have the combine, so he's preparing for his pro day. And I definitely think of, somebody like yourself, spending time with these athletes that maybe haven't even spent a ton of time on a track and need some of the finer tuning, especially when, a stopwatch and the time that's on that stopwatch means tens, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially even more. But recognizing that for your specific market that I imagine you're working with, it's more of the allure of the scholarship. Is that fair?
So yeah, for sure. For the majority of my athletes, they're almost all high school. Now, since I've been here for this will be my 4th year, I do have several athletes that are in college right now, and those athletes being in college, some have come back and I still train them while they're in college. But even now, I've got a couple who are post-collegiate. One just got drafted into I think it's called the Fan Controlled Football League.
Yeah.
And then, and then I was working with another kid who was going to test out the combine. He's run like a 4.4. He's trying to get down to a 4.3. And so I was working with him for a while, but then he got an agent, and the agent sent him to Florida. So, which I get it. There's no training facilities here. So when there's a foot of snow on the ground and they can't train, that's an issue.
Yeah,
but
sure.
so it's basically kids are chasing scholarships. Anything that they can go to a combine or showcase, and whether they're broad jumping 10 feet or they're dropping a 4, and I'm not going to say a 4.4 because 4.4 is ridiculous. If there's a 4.4 or plethora of 4.4s, it's probably a glitch or some malfunction in time. We're looking like sub 4.8 for most kids. If they drop into 4.6 or faster, start getting a lot of looks. So yeah, getting that, that exposure. And even if they haven't had a lot of playing time, if they go to a camp and drop a fast time, eyes are going to be on their film like that. I've got a kid who hasn't even played much at all, and he went down to Florida and did a combine. You're going to laser 4.6, and immediately he's like, I'm getting follows from Clemson, Ohio State, and LSU, and every time I see him, he's like, oh yeah, they followed me, they sent me an offer. So he actually just got an offer from K-State, and he has almost no film, almost none. It's unbelievable.
That's
But yeah.
wild. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. And for you, I mean, you've developed this expertise, obviously through reps yourself. You further developed your expertise, in the trenches, so to speak, while balancing going through school. And then your main business at this point, right, as a new grad from DPT school, is still more speed and performance. You have started your own private practice, right? That was last October, I believe, is what you told me. What are some things that have been challenging for you, either managing one of those businesses or them collectively in itself?
So since the pandemic, well, it's not even that the kids are scared. It's that the parents understand the magnitude of the virus, and some of them have just held their kids out completely. And I understand. But it's been troubling and it's been vicious. I mean, this virus has been awful. But just getting people to feel okay training has been a challenge in itself. Getting patients to come in and feel comfortable during a pandemic it's difficult. And you can't spend a lot of time trying to convince them, because then it's almost like you're devaluing their, fear for their life. And you can educate and you can tell them, hey, the masks work, just wear the masks, we do sanitizing, whatever. Nothing's 100% foolproof. So, if someone's not comfortable coming, I just say, okay, that's it. I might give them a couple minutes, but if beyond that it's a challenge, say, okay, well, when this is cleared up or when things have calmed down, just give me a call or something, and I let them do what they're comfortable with. But that's been the biggest challenge, is that my volume has dropped off substantially. And even in the beginning of the pandemic, St. Louis, it said no personal training at all. They closed down gyms for several months. So between I think March and June 16th, I went home to Iowa, and I was trying to start stuff up there because Iowa's done a horrible job with the pandemic, but it was open. And so for the last few months of school, I actually lived at home in Iowa, and I was training up there. There's a bunch of freshman basketball girls, a baseball kid, and we were just out in the streets because they locked up all the tracks. So it's been challenging just to find a venue, let alone find people who are comfortable training in said venue.
Yeah, and I think the most challenging thing, and I don't want you to take this as a slight at all, but being somebody who's younger, being somebody who's not as well established, you just don't have as many touch points to have that consumer confidence. And consumer confidence is largely something that we're talking about when we talk about a service-based industry, that, hey, I know this person and they have enough touch points in my head for me to know that they're going to take care of me. But if you're a relative unknown, or you're this kind of upstart, so to speak, in their eyes, and they don't have enough people that have told them, or there's not enough of a presence online, or there's not enough of reviews, or the county official just said, oh, things are trending poorly. Like, there's some things that you just can't control. So, I mean, I just overall just appreciate your mindset. I mean, you've definitely been active and engaged from a social media standpoint, just being very transparent about the people that you are working with. And recently you also had an article on Simply Faster, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the second one, or?
It's my fifth.
Fifth. Okay. I feel bad. I'm sorry about that. But the last one that I just right, it was developing speed through plyometrics. And you were, communicating, I think, a lot of really, really good things, right? I mean, the best athletes, or the fastest athletes, are often the best at the basics. And oftentimes we only need to tweak small variables to really achieve, an outcome that we're working towards. Do you want to talk to anybody about that article in particular before we go into rehabbing the sprinting athlete?
So the big takeaways from that article. So essentially, there's been a big wave of coaches and athletes and professionals recently that have kind of they've been really on the front lines pushing the sprint, jump, do things fast and explosively agenda. And with that has come a lot of what I put in the article is quote unquote stuff. And so what I mean by stuff is that, among all the sprints and jumps and things, it's almost like, okay, we need to pick 5 sprints and jumps and throws, and let's just do them. And if you ask the majority, why are you doing that? Say, well, it's a great CNS stimulus, which they're not wrong. But, when I see the athletes sprint and I see these issues where their ankles are collapsing, or their knees and hips are collapsing, or their trunk is hunched over, or they're hinged in the hip and they're not getting full extension, or something to that effect, I just think, okay, there's something missing here, whether it's a stiffness issue, a biomechanical issue, nation issue, and we can address that through plyos. So basically the article goes into depth about, how can you, where should your line of thinking be when you start a plyometric program? How do you dissect maybe a little bit of film and see, okay, these are some issues. Let's look at the issues we see when they sprint, and let's see if we can emulate some of those same issues through plyometrics. So for example, the ankles collapsing. You can go through the pogo series. So we've got the mini pogos, the medium pogos, max pogos, and those are all in place. You can go through forward, backward, sideways, and just continue to increase the challenge seemingly forever. Whether you add a weight vest, an elastic band, a medicine ball, and it's just to get coaches feeling comfortable problem solving rather than just like, okay, I know that knee tuck jumps are good, and I know that butt kick jumps are good, and single leg hops are really good. But what are they good for? If it's not targeted and there's no purpose and no focus, then maybe our time is better served elsewhere.
It's the what is it? The circus. There's enough circus type activities that look cool and certainly are challenging to do, but sometimes you sit there and you wonder, are there too many variables in play here for me to actually have a desirable outcome? So I just loved the practicality of that particular article, and I'm definitely going to have to dive into some of the other ones. But if we're talking about rehabbing the sprinter or just rehabbing the team sport athlete that has to sprint, what are some general recommendations that you have for people that are especially targeted at things that you think many overlook?
So I think that the more we can make rehab look like the activity, the more that our rehab is going to carry over to the sport. So, say that an athlete rolls an ankle and they're in stage 1 of recovery, where it's just inflamed and whatever else. Okay, you're not going to want to jump around and cut and do whatever else with that athlete. But say they're getting into phase 2, the pain's starting to fade away, swelling's not as problematic, and they can tolerate some like low amplitude things. Okay, maybe we're blending in some like, elastic ankle band stuff and whatever else to just kind of bridge the gap. But as soon as they can start tolerating cutting and jumping and sprinting and planting and accelerating, decelerating, things of that nature, I think that is what the athlete needs. And things that are maybe often overlooked are, the biomechanics of the way that they move. So I've got an athlete who's very high level. He's a Division I running back, and when he sprints, he continues to pull his hamstrings over and over and over and over. And I just take my phone out, I start videoing him. I'm like, okay, what the heck is going on? And every single step, his foot is reaching like this far in front of his center of mass, too far. And so instead of punching the ground behind him, he's kind of clawing his way across the ground. So he's actually engaging his hamstrings to pull himself across the field rather than using more of his glutes plus hamstrings to propel himself forward. So he's doing all this pulling. He has no flexibility, and he just, boom, hamstring. And so for his rehab process, it was one, learning how to sprint without overstriding. But two, I wanted him to learn proper cycling mechanics. How can you cycle and actively pull the foot closer? Again, it's like a game of inches. If I can pull it this much closer to a center of mass, what effect does that have? And in the long run, it increased his speed substantially, like a couple tenths off his 40, and he was healthy, and he had an amazing season. Whereas the season before, he was sidelined with injury over and over and over. It's just these little things, like you were saying before, that can go an extremely long way. And I feel like we get so caught up in the reactive healthcare system that, not only reactive, but we only look at the symptoms and we treat the symptoms rather than what is the source. Why did they get hurt in the first place? Was it a freak accident? Or was it something they did over and over time that could have been prevented had we just taken the time to dive in and look?
Yeah, I mean, I look back at and this is not a discredit because I am where I am today because of my rehabilitation experience while I was at Ohio State. But I can just say that when I did pull my hamstring freshman year, my rehab process didn't involve a lot of things that looked like running. So recognizing sometimes that scooter walks and even things that are well researched like Nordics are still incomplete when it comes to high speed activity and injuries that occur while going through high speed. Something that I have gotten more and more comfortable with over the years, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is either like the low recovery or dribble style drills, right? During that acute phase, or even a re-education phase for people. Can you, discuss a little bit about that for the audience?
Yes. So actually, I agree a ton. So anytime I see a hamstring, instead of doing the traditional, manual resistance, eccentrics, and the isometrics, and all these different holds in the Nordics, which I think those are all great at building hamstring strength, and it's well documented, like you said. I go through the motor patterns of dribbles, and as long as it's tolerable, as long as it's low enough amplitude that it's not putting them at any risk, there's nothing wrong with cycling and just feeling the weight of the body. Now, obviously, if they can't tolerate it, then we wouldn't do it. But if they're pain-free and they can go through just slow, deliberate dribbling, feeling that they're, striking the ground underneath them, and it does engage the hamstrings throughout because they do have to claw back underneath. They have to whip the foot down, and then they also have to whip it back up to continue that cycling motion. I think that the value of those dribbles during, especially hamstring recovery, is very overlooked. And I'd say that the majority of healthcare practitioners maybe aren't even aware of that. Whereas there's a lot of sport coaches that use dribbles quite frequently. And I think that if we could educate more of our peers to the value of that, then it'd go a long way in helping athletes in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, I am fortunate to share space with two people over the years that really have deep dove down that track and field space. Whether or not it was Jared Boyd, who's now with the Memphis Grizzlies, who spent some time with us. He was actually a track and field coach at one of the local high schools. It was state championship level powerhouse. And then Anthony Anarino, who now coaches track at Bullis High School. That's actually a nationally renowned track and field program. So I've been fortunate just to spend enough time around them. But like you said, I mean, I think we need to do a really good job of exposing ourselves to the highest levels of performance if we want to be in this sports and orthopedic setting. Talk about stuff like dribbling. We've talked about sprinting, and we barely mentioned team sport athletes and sprinting athletes, right? Sprinters. Talk to us a little bit about the differences in terms of how you might approach sessions with them, whether or not they're in rehab or performance mode or somewhere on the spectrum.
So, given that the majority of my athletes are field sport athletes, I am very particular about the way they sprint. And the reason that is because I think that if I train them to move and produce power like the fastest athletes in the world, even though they might not get up to full speed in a game, even though they may never exhibit those exact same mechanics in a game, having the ability to kind of flip a switch and engage in that on just boom, flick, they get that window. And they can just, okay, I need to sprint. I need to get through that window. Okay, now I'm in the open field. Oh, cool, I can get to top speed. If you look at the NFL, the majority of the max speeds recorded by the next gen stats or whatever, it's on big breakaway plays. No one's seeing 22, 23 miles per hour in the trenches. They're just not. They might hit the hole at like 16 to 18 miles per hour, but they are not hitting their max speed in there. So if I can get someone to learn how to lean forward and use proper acceleration mechanics, just as soon as I say go, I think that when they're in a game, whether they're reading a play and say, okay, I need to commit and go that way, they can then trigger them on and just start to take off. Now, I understand that when you're reading a play, when you're reading the game, your feet are going to be lower to the ground. You're not going to get the same knee drive because now that means you have higher air times. And if you have higher air times and someone's going to juke you out, they're going to kill you. You can't just go flying, like a bat out of hell into a pile of people or into someone who's moving at maybe 50% of their pace and ready to juke you out and expect to make a play. So I teach them they need to read first, then react. And once they react and commit, then they can start to kind of turn on those track mechanics per se. On the flip side, for track athletes, I don't really train them any different other than the fact that I wouldn't include all of those things, telling them, okay, well, you're going to read play, you need to react, you need to understand that I know this doesn't look like your sport. And so I just skip all of that and we just get right into it. So another thing that I don't do with my track athletes, which I probably should do more of, is I don't do a lot of agility work just because they don't really see a value in it, especially if they're like year-round track athletes. I don't see much of a sense of, spending like hours and hours and hours of teaching them how to cut and drive and spin and decelerate and all of those things when, they just need to go. Whereas I do try to alternate sessions with my football guys. So I'll do an acceleration session, a top speed session, and agility session. So that's really the only difference.
No, I like it. I mean, I think a lot of people probably would benefit from at least hearing how some of those sessions are structured. I think it would give us a better idea. I mean, I just think about, I mean, we're an insurance-based session, and say ACL rehab, right? Or Achilles rehab, or even somebody where you have a hamstring pull, calf pull. You can do blocked days where you have different points of emphasis during your in-session times, where, let's just oversimplify it. Linear day, lateral day, right? And I could just do those two things. And then let's say they're doing more of an aerobic focused recovery day, so to speak, somewhere. Then they've got some kind of a lifting day thrown in. But I think appreciating how sometimes the macro of a week-long session or a week-long block would look is something that would be beneficial in itself for many rehab professionals. So Tuesday and Thursday aren't the exact same session, and then they're not also asking the person for their home program to do something that looks exactly like they did in session on Tuesday and Thursday. So sometimes just understanding, whether or not it's a macro of a week, macro of a month, what things look like and how these different days are categorized. But I mean, for you, you're getting to float back and forth between these two different worlds with not just team sport athletes and sprinters, but performance and then a rehabilitation side of things. When the word, I should say the phrase injury prevention gets thrown around, I imagine we're under the same belief with injury reduction strategies. We're trying to mitigate risk. What are some things or some topics that you find yourself discussing a lot of times or oftentimes with the people that you're spending time with?
So I did a podcast a while back, and we had talked about, I want to say this was with Jerry DeFilippo. We talked about how, athletes move the way they move. And so I always have my PT glasses on, even when I'm in a performance session. And I'm looking for ways to improve performance, but I'm also looking for potential pitfalls of the way that they prefer to move. And, I'm excited to say that I have properly identified several potential injuries, and of those, the athletes that came regularly, we solved their issues, and maybe they wouldn't have pulled their hamstring, maybe I would have been wrong, but the other handful of athletes who were inconsistent or didn't come as often as maybe they should have, almost every single one of them pulled their hamstrings. So I'm always looking, and I'm totally transparent with them too. Say, okay, guys, you reach a lot. You can't reach a lot and expect to run fast all the time. Like if you go all out running the way you do, I'm telling you, you're a ticking time bomb. Something's going to happen. So we need to fix this. We need to fix it now. And initially, like, we start making a big headway and things are looking better and better. And then they disappear for a while because they have so many other things going on here. And then they show up and it's like, all right, let's do a time trial. And we say go, and boom. Or they deadlifted right before the session and then went back to their faulty mechanics because they're under fatigue, and boom, hamstring. Or they left my session and then went and deadlifted, hamstring. I mean, it's crazy how these little tiny mechanical issues can just manifest into something so much more. And so, I guess to get back to your question, how do I go about maybe addressing these? It's kind of like you said. It's like I can go back and forth between each world, but I kind of live in the middle, and I'm constantly in both worlds. And maybe you have a similar experience, but it's troubling because I see all over the place that kids don't know. They're never taught how to move. They're never taught how to move. They're just taught to do stuff. And because of that, they go about their whole childhoods with awful mechanics. they never learn how to use their hips, they never develop a core, and then they run into all of these issues. And if I could get in there earlier, and you know, I know that we can't necessarily prevent injury, but if we can reduce the incidence of injury by just getting in and making these subtle changes, I think that we could, bring a lot more value to our patients and potential athletes and performance as well. But the way our current healthcare model works, people only want to see us when they're hurt. They never want to get screened prior. It's only when they're hurt that suddenly, I need to find someone who understands movement. Let's go to a PT now that I'm in a grade 3 tear.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you were talking about earlier reminds me of my high performers. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. You remind me of myself a little bit in terms of you started a side hustle while you were in PT school. My first company was not Rehab to Perform. It was Lax Factory. It was lacrosse services, and I did clinics, camps, and we had club teams as the program went on. The kids that were the healthiest and were not hurt often were often the kids that were either, and this is probably a mix of multi-sport athletes, and the kids that you also heard just playing often, right? They were exploring the sport. They were exploring movement in the neighborhood. They were exploring movement in their backyard. And they just had this pool of movement options. So it's like the movement encyclopedia, right? Where they've tried and referenced things on their own A to Z, whereas some of the kids have such a limited vocabulary from which they're pulling from because everything they do is drilled. They're used to drills at practice, and there's so much structure to what it is that they do from a movement standpoint that it's very, very challenging for them to even take in a situation like you mentioned, where there are beneficial cues or things that they need to do differently, but they have a hard time adjusting to it, because they don't have all of these different reference points. So that was something that I would just see frequently. We would try to do everything that we could to throw certain things, whether it was, plyos or decel based drills into warm-ups, get creative with some of the things we do conditioning wise, just the implementation of free play style drills where it almost forced them to do certain things without you telling them to do it. Like for you, I'm thinking about like just chase drills where you just get people to actually run it at top speed without even thinking because they're trying to chase somebody else. And we could do some things like that during a team sport practice. So it's just interesting to see some of the different parallels. Although you come from a sprinting background, obviously you're working with team sport athletes, and then just some of my experiences, never having the opportunity to work with sprinters, so to speak. But my lens is more reserved for that team sport space. So just super, super interesting. And I think something that I could just continue to appreciate the role. And as you mentioned, that ideally we keep having by providing information to people in the community. It's like for you, you're in St. Louis now and reaching out and doing workshops for people and doing free screenings. And some of our biggest relationships have come to, as a result of just going out there and delivering great information and exposing people to certain things. I mean, the long-term athlete development model was one of the things that I would preach over and over and over and over with the young people. But Brendan, not to wrap things up here immediately, but I want you to have the opportunity to give everybody kind of just some final words and potentially a little bit of advice. I mean, you are somebody that is a relatively new grad. You've hit the ground running, right? You weren't sitting on your hands during a pandemic, just waiting around for opportunities. It's not to say that it's been easy, but what are some other things that maybe you can share that are just words of advice for anybody that's either in PT school or going through their own challenges as we're hopefully on the back end of this thing?
So I think that, so I'll back up. When COVID hit, I was actually a part of a task force put together by the ACA PT. And it was our job to kind of screen the students of the class of 2020 and find the different things that they felt that they needed, whether it was psychological services or, how to cope with virtual education, which is now apparently like everyone's like gurus at it all of a sudden. I mean, we had to adjust so quick. And I think the biggest takeaways that I got from that was, you know, everyone had to be flexible, and we weren't, no one was prepared for this to happen. But I think that if we can be flexible in everything that we do and, be comfortable going against the grain and, not doing the status quo, like, okay, graduate and just start applying for jobs everywhere, or, just chase what you want to do. And there's going to be some costs that come with that. But if you search around long enough, and you try hard enough and you exhaust your options, you do a good job networking, you can usually find a way to make something salvageable. So for me, I had job offers in Iowa and Kansas and St. Louis and, Texas and places all over the country. But then the pandemic hit and they were all swept off the table. So like all of my future plans were just done. And so I thought, well, I don't see this pandemic going away anytime soon. I'm probably not going to get a call back from any of these people anytime soon. I graduate and I take my test very soon. I need to have something in play. So what I did was I continued to grow my business and grow my reputation as a speed and performance trainer. And, I've got a reputation with my movement, my biomechanical background and whatnot. And I was hoping that if I worked hard enough at that, it would get my foot in the door with other people so that I could be in a position to, start my life if I absolutely have to. And so I was fortunate and I was able to get into a local gym here. And I got like a, once in a lifetime type of opportunity with them. And I never would have found that if I didn't just, take everything as it came and just be fluid and adapt to it and just be comfortable being uncomfortable, which I think being a student athlete helped me, have those kinds of qualities. And I don't expect everyone to be able to do that. But I think that, what I've learned through this pandemic is that, we're very resilient people. Humans are super resilient, and you see all the ways that people are coping with job loss. I mean, how many ebooks do you see on sale now? How many virtual training sessions do you see? How many how-tos and YouTube and Twitch and Twitter? There's so many things people have monetized just to adjust. And I think if we just take kind of a step back to gather ourselves and then find just chase everything you like. And maybe if you stay at it long enough, something good will come from it. There's not a lot more I can add to that. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I think everyone just got discouraged with the pandemic, and just keeping a positive attitude and like a can-do attitude and just being kind of getting an entrepreneurial spirit and go a long ways.
Part of what you were saying almost made me think of like Bruce Lee's Be Like Water, where you're just right. You're moldable, you're adaptable, you're fluid. You're continuing to move, right? You're not still, and you're just taking the form of what is presented to you. So for you, you've definitely gone out and created opportunities for yourself, and I think you're in a great spot. I'm very, very excited to just kind of see where the rest of your career takes itself. So, Brendan, I really, really enjoyed talking to you today. For people that want to connect with you, where are the best places to do that outside of your website, which I'll give a quick plug, BT Acceleration, and that is like excellent, not acceleration in terms of getting faster or increasing your velocity. Okay. BT Acceleration, that's EXCEL.com. So social media, give a quick plug.
Yeah. So it's at Brendan Thompson, Brendan, and Thompson, but without the last O, because some other person with a wonderful name got to it before I did on every social media platform. So there's that, and then there's at BT Acceleration, like you said, EXCEL on Twitter and Instagram, and then same thing, my email, btacceleration@outlook.com.
Awesome. Brendan, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.